Hey guys, I hope you're doing well and enjoying your week. I just want to take a few minutes and touch on the very basics of job analysis, just so you have a good idea in terms of the material for this week. So, basically, a job analysis, really the goal in terms of what we're trying to do is really define the job in terms of its component parts. So, what we're really doing is, taking the particular job, the individuals within it, and breaking it down so that we have a really good understanding of what it is. And there's really three major parts. So, we're looking to break down what exactly the job description is, looking on how we do it, why we do it, the job specifications. So what we're really looking to do is identify the KSAOs and the job evaluation. So how do we exactly evaluate the value and worth of particular jobs so that we can obviously set forth particular salaries and et cetera. Again, the purpose of job analysis, really looking for job classification, really looking for good selection placement. And generally speaking, we want to have a really good job description. So we know what particular people is expected of them, how we can take that in terms of our selection process, and so forth. And again, what we're really looking to identify is those KSAOs, and that really stands for knowledge, skills, abilities, and other abilities, so to speak. So there's really two approaches to a job analysis, and this is really again to kind of gather information about A, the work, and B, the worker, really at the same time. And again, keep in mind, the job analysis, we're really looking to break down that particular job within an organization so that we can be most efficient and successful. When we talk about task-oriented techniques, what we're really focusing on is the very specific various tasks that are needed to be performed within that job. So, for an example, when we look at being a professor, what are those task-oriented things that need to be done? So things like grading exams, developing written assignments, those particular types of things. When we look at worker-oriented, what we're looking to do is examine broad human behaviors, again, that are needed in order for that particular position to be efficient and successful. So we're kind of concentrating more on social interaction. So when we look at the idea of a professor, we would think of things like being creative, being organized, having those people skills, so to speak. Now, one of the things that's kind of irritating is, when you do a job analysis and you really try to break things down, the distinction between the two, task oriented and work oriented, is not always clear. So they tend to kind of overlap one another. What's more important? Well, it really depends upon the job. So, certain professions may be more task oriented. Accounting kind of pops up into my mind. You really don't need to be an extrovert to be a really good accountant. In certain particular professions, worker oriented really needs to be emphasized. For an example, like in sales, you really need to be a people person in terms of being successful and efficient in that particular profession. So there's many different job analysis types of methods, and your book really dives into that. For example, we want to come up with a good job description of a professor. Well, obviously, social context is going to have a lot to do with that in terms of what is needed. And what I mean by that is, what we would identify as a good college professor in one particular area of the country may be very different in another particular area of the country. So obviously, social contexts have a big influence on that. But generally speaking, when we want to have an idea of generally what is a good job description for a particular type of job, we might do something like task inventory approach, where we would basically reach out to subject matter experts or incumbents. Your book talks a little bit about that, and basically we kind of survey and say, what is it that you feel or you have identified as key elements of that particular job, that might be important. Your notes kind of talk a little bit about, task statements are generated by experts who are familiar with those particular jobs. They list particular task statements. They rank those based upon what they feel is most important, and so forth. And then those come back to us, and we kind of overlook them. And again, I'm really generalizing here. It's a little bit more specific than this, but we take that information and we kind of generalize it in terms of scales. What do most people feel is important? What do people feel is least important, and so forth. And again, we kind of tailor it to our social context and our needs in terms of putting together a really good job description. So the biggest question that I often get from students is really, again, and I'm kind of repeating myself a little bit here, but I really want to emphasize it. Why is a job analysis so important? Well, a job analysis really encompasses or overlaps into a lot of those different areas that you guys identified in the first week in terms of those 5 key things. One of the things that you will notice over the next couple of weeks is they're all involved with one another. If you don't do a good job analysis, your selection process, for example, is going to be completely screwed up. So if you can't put together a really good job description, how are you going to hire the right people in terms of doing what it is that you want to do? If you can't put together a really good job description in terms of identifying those task-oriented techniques and work-oriented techniques, how are you going to have a valid or reliable performance appraisal in terms of salary increases, firing, promotions, things along those lines? So you can see how they kind of overlap and so forth. One of the things that I also wanted to touch on that a lot of students tend to get confused about is this whole idea of criterion measurement. Don't confuse yourself. Don't stress yourself out in trying to really understand what these things basically mean. With criterion measurement, it's simply just standards used to measure an employee's success or failures, right? So again, we're interested in individuals' performance. We're interested in behaviors that are relevant to the organization's goals. Again, that's the whole point of IO psychology. We're taking the field of psychology and we're applying it to the world of work to make it more efficient and successful. So basically, when you go to hire somebody, right, you have what your book talks about as ultimate criterion and actual criterion. So you sit down with a group of people on a hiring committee and you say, all right, what aspects of performance that define the success of that job? So basically what you're saying is, what is everything we would want, right? In terms of this person coming in. It's kind of like a wish list. All right. So, you're hiring a professor. What is every single thing that we would want this professor to do, that we would look for in terms of hiring this person? That's our ultimate criteria. Our actual criteria is real world, right? So we know that we're not going to get every single thing on our wish list. So we consider those elements that seem to be most important. We also consider those elements that are most easily measured. All right. So how we quantify interviews, for an example, how we quantify job analysis is extremely important. So for an example, this past summer, I was in a hiring committee in terms of hiring a counselor for our counseling department on my main campus. We had scales on like 1 to 5, pretty basic, right? And based upon particular questions that they would answer or the answers they would give us, we would rank them. Each one of us would rank them. It gives, or it at least has some sort of objective, so to speak. It makes things again a little bit easier in terms of defining and identifying what person you want to hire and so forth. So we want to try to quantify things. How do we pick? That's often a question I get from students. You have this giant wish list, the ultimate criterion. You got to really limit it down to the actual criterion. I'll be straightforward and honest. Whatever's the easier to measure. So you really don't want to beat yourself up, okay? In terms of that, remember, when we do hiring committees, we are looking for people, we're doing job analysis in the real world. There's only so much money that can go around or be spent within these particular processes. So you want to have things that are going to be most easily measured, in terms of narrowing down what exactly it is that you're going to ask, in terms of your selection process and in terms of your job analysis. Now, one of the concepts, again, that a lot of my students tend to get really confused about is this thing called criterion deficiency and criterion contamination. So keep in mind, the ultimate criterion, that's our wish list. Our actual criterion, that's what in reality that we can actually look at and what we can measure. And again, what from that wish list do we kind of throw out to the side? Again, time, money, what is it that we can realistically do within this particular job hiring, job analysis, selection, or whatever. Criterion deficiency, criterion contamination, I'll be honest, by definition, they're very different things. Um, Overall, they basically mean the same thing. Okay. So, in terms of definition, criterion deficiency is simply just a condition in which dimensions and the ultimate measure are not part of or are not captured by the actual measure. Okay. So, really, what that kind of means, and I'll actually touch on criterion contamination quickly by definition first. Criterion contamination simply just means caused by simple random measurement error. Okay. So, deficiency criterion, layman's terms, it's things we miss. All right. In a job analysis, in an interview, we're human. Okay. So, for an example, we're trying to identify, we're trying to measure a person's worker oriented skills, right? So, one thing we want to make sure of is that person really has the social skills, they really have the people skills in order to perform that job. Well, in reality, people lie. People put up fronts during interviews. So there's a certain amount of error that's going to happen there, okay, in terms of what's going on. Also, we may have going into an hour interview 10 questions we want to ask. We may not get to all of them. So there's an error. There is a certain amount of mistake, so to speak, in terms of what goes on in the job analysis, what goes on in the selection process, what goes on within that interview. Certain things just don't happen that need to happen. And that's really what deficiency and contamination are talking about. Another huge thing in terms of what IO psychologists tend to look at, and this falls under the realm of contamination, biased. Some people get jobs because they know somebody. Some people get promoted because they're a friend of a friend. Some people don't get jobs because of their race, their religion, whatever that may be. So things such as how attractive, how likable you may be, discrimination, things like that, individual bias can really influence or undermine, okay, the selection, job analysis, performance appraisal, whatever. And we kind of slide that under what we'd call contamination. So again, have a general idea of what these definitions are, but that's basically what we're talking about in terms of criterion measurement. So, this wish list, what is it that we really realistically can look at? Again, time, money, we only got so much. And then, how do we try to minimize as much as we possibly can these ideas of criterion deficiency and contamination? And can we? All right. So I'm just kind of taking a real quick look at some of the other concepts that I just want to hit on for you guys. Lastly, I'll talk a little bit about distinctions among performance criteria. Okay. So one of the things that my students often get confused about is this idea of contextual performance and task performance. All right. So I'll give you an example. And again, these are all right in your notes. So an administrative assistant is rated high on task performance if he types quickly and answers phones efficiently. but he is rated high on contextual performance if he demonstrates enthusiasm, helps his workers with a problem, and he may be having and works hard to support his organization. So again, we're looking at contextual performance, basically the activities, those task-oriented type of things. Task performance, again, we're looking at work-related activities. So a great example of that would be, this idea of social skills, getting along with coworkers, those particular types of things. Oh, I'm sorry. I think I actually confused. I flipped those around. Erase that. Contextual performance is, you're basically your ability in terms of working with others. So that would go along with worker oriented. Your task performance, again, is more of that task oriented. So that would be more of those very specific things that you need to do within your job. All right. So other than that hiccup at the very end, I hope this video helps you guys out a little bit. If you have any questions about the material or your discussion questions or anything related to that, please feel free to drop me an email and I will talk to you guys soon. All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.